Rhythm can be a confusing part of learning to play music, but there aren't that many concepts you need to know. I want to help you put a name to what you've been hearing in music your entire life. Part 1, pulse. Start by listening to this short piece of music I wrote for the series and try to clap along. If you felt the pulse where I do, you might have clapped something like this. Bum, 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 ba, ba, bum, 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 bum. What distinguishes pulse from other ideas in rhythm is its consistency. A pulse is also called a beat, and it's like a heartbeat. It continues completely consistently. So on top of that consistent pulse, we can have other kinds of rhythm that are not all the same length, right? We had a melody that went ba, 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 long, short, short, long, right? Those are not all the same length, but they live on top of this pulse that is completely consistent, like somebody's footsteps or heartbeat. Even the most complex rhythms in music are always different ways of organizing the pulse. You can practice identifying the pulse in music that you love just by trying to clap along. And even if you don't have a music teacher present to tell you whether you're doing it right, if you listen closely and you're doing it correctly, it should sound like that pulse belongs with the music. Even very experienced musicians will sometimes try this with a piece where we're not sure exactly what's happening with the rhythm. We'll try clapping along, we'll try finding the pulse. And if it doesn't seem to line up, we know we need to try something else. So try clapping along with music you love to identify the pulse. And what you'll notice is that depending on the piece of music, the pulse might be faster or slower. We call that tempo. The tempo is the speed of the pulse in the music. I can demonstrate with this piece of music. First, let me play it slower. Now let me play it faster. In that last example, the pulse was pretty quick, right? It was bum, 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 bum. That's quite quick for a pulse. If you can identify the pulse in a piece of music, every other concept in rhythm is pretty easy. Starting with meter, which we'll cover next. You can also download the sheet music to the musical examples I'll be using in this series for free at my website, pianofluency.com. And while you're there, you can check out my membership program where I help beginner, adult students of popular music go to an intermediate level with a structured program. To understand this idea, compare these two musical examples. We would say one of those is in 4, one is in 3. When you hear that something's in 4 or in 3 or even in 7, we're referring to groups of strong and weak beats. You can hear this pattern that gets created in a piece of music. So listen to the example in 4 and I'll count out the beats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I'll play the example in 3, where I've modified the music a little bit so that that same pattern that repeated every 4 beats before now only takes 3 beats. And I'm going to try counting it in 4 so that you hear how weird that sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. That sounds really weird, right? And I don't know if we'll leave them in, but I had to do a few takes of that because it was hard to play at first. So here's how it sounds now if I count it in 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. You can hear that the music naturally organizes itself into these groupings of beats or pulses. This is the concept behind meter. And it's useful to identify the meter of a song even if you're not learning it from sheet music. It's just helpful to recognize how many beats are in each measure. And a measure is a single grouping of these strong and weak beats. So in 4, a measure is 4 beats. In 3, a measure is 3 beats. All of this relates to the concept of time signature. That is the 2 numbers that you see on the left side of the page when you're reading sheet music. That's the time signature. The top number in the time signature refers to the meter. It refers to how many beats belong in each grouping of strong and weak beats that we call a measure. Every time signature will also have a number on the bottom. That refers to something totally different. It refers to what type of note gets 1 beat. So let's take a brief detour and define all of the most common note values you're going to see in the most common time signature, which is 4/4. This is a quarter note, and next to it is a quarter note rest. Those get 1 beat. This is a half note. It gets 2 beats. If we add a dot to it, that makes the note value 150% of what it normally is. So adding that to a 2-beat note gives us 3 beats. That's a dotted half note. A whole note gets 4 beats. And we can also go smaller than the quarter note. This is an 8th note and an 8th note rest, and even a 16th note and a 16th note rest. You notice the names of all of these notes are fractions. They are fractions of the measure in 4/4 time. So in a 4/4 measure, we have 4 beats in the measure. Each beat gets a quarter note. If we want a whole note, it's going to get 4 beats. It's crucial to understand that 4/4 time is by far the most common time signature in most kinds of music. And that is why everything in music notation, when it comes to rhythm, is really heavily biased towards 4/4 time. And that includes these note values. As we move into other time signatures, we're still going to refer to all of these note values by the fraction of the 4/4 bar, right? So a quarter note is still called a quarter note, even in other time signatures where it's actually a different fraction of the bar. And that can be a little confusing at first, but it's nice, at least, that every time we look at a quarter note, we give it the same name. Okay, so now we know our note values and we know about those fraction names for every kind of note. We can come back to the bottom number in a time signature. That bottom number is referring to different types of notes. If it's a 4, it's referring to quarter notes. If it's an 8, it's referring to eighth notes, and so on from there. Every now and then you will see a 2 on the bottom or even a 16 on the bottom. Let's apply these concepts and see why they're useful by looking at something called cut time. We typically use cut time when a piece of music that's in 4/4 starts speeding up a little bit, and we want to feel a larger pulse in the music so that it doesn't feel so frantic. Here, for example, if I play this at this tempo, I could count it in 4, but that feels kind of heavy. If I instead count it in 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, that feels a lot lighter and more natural. So often, as pieces of music get a little faster, if the composer wants you to feel them in 2 big beats like that, they will, instead of notating 4/4, they'll put 2/2, or they'll use this symbol that stands for cut time. What that means is we've cut both the 4 on top and the 4 on bottom in half. So we have 2 beats per measure, but a half note gets a beat. And that ends up meaning that the music looks identical, but it feels different. So that's one reason we might choose to put a different number on the bottom of the time signature than 4. Most of the time, if we can, we'll put a 4 on the bottom. And a lot of times when we are putting an 8 on the bottom, that's to help with compound meter. Next up, we'll define subdivision, which is the most useful rhythm concept for learning to play better in a groove. This is the concept you need if you want to play rhythm more accurately with a better sense of groove, especially things that are syncopated and more complex rhythms between the hands. They really rely on an understanding of subdivision. So let's get into it. Subdivision slices the beat into smaller parts. To demonstrate, I'm going to play the same example we've been using. I want you to clap along, and I want you to listen if there are any note rhythms here that don't fall with your claps. It's in the second half there that we don't fall within this beat, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. We have this 1, 2, 3, 4. That note falls in between the beats. So if we want to count some sort of pulse that fits with that, we actually have to go smaller than the pulse we previously identified. We have to subdivide it even smaller, and we're going to use an and to do that. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So by adding in that and, we now have this grid of a subdivision that every single note in the music can fall onto. That's useful because it's easier for us to create a super even patter of whatever those syllables are, 1 and 2 and. We'll go to 1 e and 16th notes in a moment. It's easier for us to make that steady than it is to tell whether we're playing some sort of more complex rhythm accurately. Especially if you're playing with other interlocking parts in the music, whether it's your own left hand or whether it's other instruments in an ensemble. Everyone is going to belong to the subdivision grid. So if you can play accurately to the subdivision grid, you're all going to be able to fit better together than if you're just kind of shooting in the dark and hoping that your rhythms are going to line up well. So let's listen to a rhythm that requires an even smaller subdivision. If I count ands with that, there's actually one note in there that doesn't fit with the ands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So that one little note, it's the E again, is not fitting with the ands. We need to go one subdivision smaller to 16th notes. I often will count this 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2, and so on. So you can keep getting smaller with the subdivision. Occasionally, it's less common, but occasionally you'll need to go all the way down to 32nd notes or even 1/64th notes. You notice they're all multiples of 2 because we're cutting things in half. And in most situations, until we get to compound meter and swing, you're always going to be dividing beats into multiples of 2 like this. So if you go small enough with your subdivisions of the beat into multiples of 2, you're going to find that subdivision grid where every single note in the music can fall. You might be wondering, why don't we just call that smallest subdivision the beat, right? We defined pulse or the beat in music as a continuous, steady feeling of rhythm beneath the music. And that's exactly what we have here. The reason that we don't make the smallest subdivision the beat is because sometimes it's quite small and it's quite fast, right? It has to be as small and as fast as the quickest note in the music. So typically there's actually a more natural, larger pulse in the music. And we go smaller than it so that we can have quicker moving notes or syncopated rhythms that don't exactly fall onto the beats. Now you may also be wondering what happens if instead of dividing the beat into 2, we divide the beat into 3 subdivisions. And in fact, that happens in a lot of music. And it's why we have something called compound meter. So that's what we will talk about next. Listen to the difference between simple and compound meter. Those two examples are very similar. The difference is just where we feel the big pulse in the music. The compound meter is something we use when we have larger pulses in the music that then get divided into groups of 3. So examples of compound meter include 6/8, 9/8, 12/8. You notice the number on top is always a multiple of 3, and that's how many of those smaller subdivisions we have in the bar, right? So we've divided the big beats into 3, and then we count all of those smaller subdivisions. That gives us how many beats in the bar. The number on the bottom is almost always going to be an 8 in compound meter, because that's referring to the fact that we will notate those smaller subdivisions in groups of 3 as eighth notes. You could, in theory, just write this out by writing everything in triplets, right? A triplet is a kind of rhythm that shows we're supposed to get 3 notes within one beat. And it's kind of a special notation that in most 4/4 music you will see from time to time. We could write everything in the music as triplets, and we would get the same effect as writing things out in compound meter. But it tends to be a lot easier to read if we just write it in compound meter when the piece of music is defined by this rhythm. So that's how we get something like this example in 6/8. And you can see that we've also beamed together the eighth notes into groups of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So in 6/8 time like this, we have a strong beat on the first beat of the measure, and then the fourth beat of the measure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 4, 1, 4, 1, 4. That's where the emphasis is. If you compare this to music written in 3/4 time, in many ways it looks very similar. We have the same number of eighth notes in the bar. We have 6 eighth notes in the bar, same number of quarter notes in the bar. If you were to write them all out, you would get 3 quarter notes in the bar. The difference is that in 3/4 time, we are feeling those quarter note pulses as the main beat. So that might sound like this. Right, so you can feel a strong beat on each of those quarter notes. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Very different from then if we group together 3 eighth notes into one beat. So that's the idea with compound meter. You're going to see 6/8 much more commonly than the others. And the important thing to understand is that we have these larger pulses then divided into something atypical, right? We normally divide everything into multiples of 2, but in the case of compound meter, we're dividing the larger beats into groups of 3. And while we're here, there's a related concept. This is something called odd meters. Sometimes the strong and weak beats in a piece of music will actually be grouped into other bigger prime numbers, like 5 or 7, or even you'll get like 11. In practice, most of the time, for an odd meter like that, things are going to break down into alternating groups of 3 and 2. So here's a really common example with 5/4. This is a grouping of 3 beats followed by a grouping of 2 beats. You might recognize I'm borrowing the syncopated rhythm that Dave Brubeck used in a famous piece that's in 5/4 time. That's called Take 5. And what happens here is that we have this pattern that takes up 3 beats, 1, 2, 3, followed by a pattern that takes up 2 beats, 1, 2. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. That's what's really going on in the music. It's not that we just have 5, a strong beat, and then 4 equal weaker beats. We actually have these smaller groupings within the odd meter of 5/4. It really helps to look for that because actually not every 7/4 is created alike for that reason. Sometimes in 7/4, you'll find a grouping of 3 and then a grouping of 4, or 2 groups of 2. Sometimes it will be 4 and then 3. And same with 5/4. I just demonstrated 3 and then 2. That's probably the most common, but you could have a 2 and then 3. Sometimes when people are writing out music in these odd meters, they will actually show you like 3 plus 2 plus 3, depending on what the meter is, to help you understand where those groupings are in the music. But typically, once you start playing a piece of music and you can hear it, if it's a well-written piece in an odd meter, or it's coming from a folk music culture where they use odd meters like this and there's a dance associated with it, you will naturally be able to hear where these groupings of 2 and 3 come in the music. I'd like to discuss the swing rhythm. It's one of my favorites. Here's how it sounds. So you can hear this, there's this bouncy feeling underneath the music. And swing feels different depending on what tempo you're playing at, depending on what style of music. But what's always true about a swing rhythm is that we have an alternating long and short eighth note. If we compare the way I'm playing this to how I've played this same piece of music with a straight eighth note, the pulse is actually in the same place, right? The quarter note is here. Bum, 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 bum. The difference is how we're dividing the beat. So if I divide it into even eighth notes, straight eighth notes like we get in classical music, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. That sounds quite different than swung eighth notes, where the and is a little bit late. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. The magic of this rhythm is that it isn't always the same. There are different ways of playing swing, right? You can play around with how heavy the swing subdivision is. You can play a really, really heavy swing. That means that shorter second eighth note comes really late. Or you can play a straighter swing, one that's just a little bit uneven. And what you choose to do will just depend on what exact style and tempo you're playing, and also kind of your personal expression. If you're new to this feeling in rhythm, the best thing to do is listen to styles of music that use swing. So, jazz, especially more traditional jazz, almost always is using a swing subdivision. It comes up a lot in musical theater music, also lots of soul and R&B, blues music, gospel music. So start by listening to those styles of music and trying to identify this subdivision of the beat. And you can just count 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And with enough exposure to that, you'll be able to just play swung eighth notes intuitively on your own. If you are new to it and you're having trouble finding that swing feeling, it can help a little bit to relate it to a triplet. There is some rough relationship to what happens when we divide a beat into 3 parts, into triplets. It's a little bit like what we saw with compound meter, where instead of dividing the beat into everything being perfectly divided into multiples of 2, in this case, there's something of a feeling of dividing things into 3. Even if you're still playing things as eighth notes, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and there's kind of a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a feeling underneath that. And the translation there is that we have a triplet where the first 2 eighth notes in the triplet are tied together. I can demonstrate on these 3 notes. So if I play triplets like this, 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and then I just don't play the D. 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. That gets me pretty close to a swung eighth note. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So thinking of the triplet and then tying the first 2 triplet notes together can be a helpful way to find the swing subdivision. And it can be tricky to read music that has a swing feel, because often we just write that as if it's straight eighth notes. We don't do anything special other than saying at the top of the page that this has a swing subdivision. So that means you're reading something like what we're showing on screen, where it just looks like normal straight eighth sheet music, and you have to know how to find that, that late eighth note there on the third beat. So I will still sometimes think of that triplet subdivision when I'm sight reading music that has a swing subdivision, just because it helps me place things against the beat and be a little more accurate with it. But you don't want to be too closely tied to that idea of the triplet subdivision because, like I say, swing can mean all sorts of different things. It typically straightens out as music gets faster. So if you're playing like fast jazz, like a bebop tune, it's often almost straight eighth notes. There's just a certain lilt to it, and there's a way that we emphasize the articulation and accents in that style of music that is quite different from how you would play it if it were straight eighth notes written out in a different style. Anywhere that the swing subdivision comes up, it's really coming out of an aural tradition. So more than anything, you always want to use your ears so that you can sound like you belong in the style when you're playing music that has a swing subdivision. That concludes our series on understanding rhythm. At least for now, there are lots of concepts related to rhythm that I left out of this series or covered pretty briefly. So if there's something in particular that you want to learn more about, you want me to discuss it on this channel, put it in the comments and I may revisit some of these rhythm concepts again in the future. In the meantime, you can head to pianofluency.com if you want to learn more from me on how to play the piano and move beyond just understanding these concepts. My name is Ted with Piano Fluency. Thanks for joining me.